As the power of the state has steadily increased, the power of the human race for deadly mischief has increased at the same time. We've all been told that the modern era, with its emphasis on democracy and freedom, has liberated the individual more than any previous period. We are taught to scoff at the notion that a king, Führer, Duce, or party could be morally or intellectually infallible. Instead, we believe that a government of the people is a clear improvement, that the majority, especially when we are part of it, can do no wrong. To suggest otherwise would be to admit that we and our neighbors are just as prone to ignorance and greed as any king or emperor.
I think the people need to admit that. It certainly can be true that those who rise to the top could be special, not necessarily in a good sense. But if you just look at the have-nots, that doesn't mean that they are morally superior.
But if this is all true, then why are we witnessing the largest and most oppressive state apparatus the world has ever known? If we are more free than ever...
Yeah, but like, just because you get to vote on a representative who just says whatever to get elected, almost certainly put forward by some rich boy who also kind of pushes them up. So, and then there's basically what they are paid to do. Yeah, and you're kind of hoping that guy, that very guy, who was already your least bad option, is going to support you, is going to represent you. Even though they don't have to, they can just do whatever. And if this doesn't work out, then you say like, oh yeah, I guess I'm just gonna get lucky at the next election.
Than ever before, why is the state more powerful than ever before?
But you must realize that in such situation, your will is so damaged, right? Like how much that guy actually represents you. Even at face value, do they actually stand for what you want? And when they get into power, do they actually do what you want?
In this video, we seek to answer this question. As in all things, the power of illusion holds sway. The belief that democracy naturally equates to greater freedom blinds us to the reality that the state has steadily grown in reach and control under democracy. Dispelling this illusion is necessary if we wish to preserve liberty. As Hans Hermann Hoppe wrote, if the power of government rests on the widespread acceptance of false, indeed absurd, and foolish ideas, then the only genuine protection is the systematic attack of these ideas and the propagation and proliferation of true ones.
The problem is that education and media dominates what people think, right? That is one of the main goals of education, is that people come out with the right ideas and pretty obedient. No doubt part of it is just trying to make you useful, essentially, for the job market, but partly just making you an obedient citizen. Because it would be naive to think that kids come to this world, it's like, you know what I want to be? A policeman for life or something. Like, yeah, you need some convincing to get people to that point.
If one wishes to trace the rise of state power, one should follow the history of wars. It is in war that the true extent of the state's power becomes visible, from the levies it imposes on the populace to finance its aggressive expansion, to the total mobilization of entire societies to fight its battles. Bertrand de Jouvenel, writing in 1949, observed that war is the health of the state. If we arrange in chronological order the various wars which have for nearly 1,000 years ravaged our Western world, one thing must strike us forcibly, that with each one there has been a steady rise in the coefficient of society's participation in it, and that the total war of today is only the logical end of an uninterrupted advance towards it, of the increasing growth of war.
But when it comes to war, you would need to be a country that can bully other countries. Basically, if you can take and get away with it, then war is worth it. If you can be the bully, then war is worth it. If you can go to Africa and say that you come in the name of freedom and democracy and all the good stuff and take their oil, then war is worth it. But I'm not claiming that other countries are better, but war is not worth it for them. And at that point, you can see that the best defense against war is more equal power distribution.
In other words, each successive conflict has drawn more deeply from the resources and energies of society, bringing the state closer to total control over the lives of its citizens. During the time of Napoleon, conscription was introduced on a large scale, and while it required military-age men to serve, it did not take everyone. Napoleon often called up only a portion of eligible men, typically a fraction of each age group, allowing many to continue their civilian lives as long as they paid the necessary taxes to support the war effort. However, the scale of his conscription was unprecedented at the time, leading to the creation of a massive army.
Yeah, it's not great. You could be just like, hey, I was born in France. It's like, hey, come and die in my war. I'd rather not. Good luck, midget.
By contrast, under the French King Louis XIV, conscription as we understand it was virtually non-existent. Armies during his time were composed mainly of professional soldiers, volunteers, and mercenaries. The average person outside these groups had little direct involvement in the wars, though they still bore the financial burden through taxes and the economic disruptions caused by conflict. Even in periods of European history often described as being stricken by near constant war, such as the 11th and 12th centuries, the armies were actually relatively small, and the campaigns typically short. During these times, kings relied on the feudal obligation of their vassals, who were required to provide military service, usually for a set period, often around 40 days. After this, vassals could return to their own affairs. Kings could call upon militias or hire mercenaries, but these forces were often limited in size and reliability, making it difficult to sustain prolonged campaigns without the cooperation of their vassals. During the Middle Ages, war was a small-scale affair because the state itself was a small-scale affair. It lacked the two crucial tools needed for expanding its power, the ability to conscript individuals and to levy widespread taxes. As Bertrand de Juvenel notes, throughout the monarchy's reign, it never dared to conscript its armies. Instead, soldiers were funded directly from the treasury, meaning that the reach of the state was limited to what it could pay for. The growth of state power, defined as its ability to control more aspects of a nation's activities and resources, is directly tied to the expansion of war. It is only in democratic societies that the state has found the means to extract the maximum amount of resources from the population.
And other populations, if they can.
As de Juvenel observes,
and other resources.
People upset the power of kings, it was, so they thought, of just these burdens that they were ridding themselves. It was the burdens of taxation and, above all, military conscription, which they hated. That being so, it is not a little surprising to see these burdens grow heavier under an up-to-date regime, and most surprising of all, to see conscription instituted, not by absolute monarchy, but as the result of its fall.
What you can say is that the more power an entity has, the more they try to push their will, the more they will manifest their will. And what the state stands for is that the state claims that they stand for the will of the people. But that is rarely the case. Because suppose, just to go there, like, would 99% of the people be for a crazy tax on the 1%? They're like, yeah, that's my interest, let's go. Yet, this will never be on offer. And when it comes to direct democracy, a lot of people would be pushing for policies right now, and it would pass. But it's never allowed right now, because you only get to choose, well, in some countries, for one guy. So that's basically a tyranny right there. Or you get to choose between two guys, but they're essentially the same guy in different colored clothes and owned by the same interest, essentially. The same class. And this marionette show, this pony show, whatever, is just a justification for their rule. Not the rule of the puppets, but whoever owns them.
Throughout history, the burden of conscription has grown heavier with each successive war, spreading like a contagion to nearly every Western state. Bertrand de Juvenel observed that conscription has often followed closely behind its counterpart, universal suffrage, the one placing in the hands of every adult person a voting paper, the other putting on his back a soldier's knapsack.
Yeah, that gives them justification. If they feel like they have a choice, if someone took away your vote, then you might like, oh my god, I'm like, okay, what if nothing changed in your country except the fact that you cannot vote? You might be like, oh my god, like I'm dominated now. But would it change anything effectively for you?
How very strange. When their masters were kings, the peoples never stopped complaining at having to pay war taxes. Then, when they have overthrown these masters and taken to taxing themselves, the currency in which they pay is not merely a part of their incomes, but their very lives. Once a state gains the ability to conscript its citizens for war and impose greater taxes, its neighbors must either follow suit or face the disadvantage of being unprepared. De Juvenel likens this dynamic to a pair of duelists who mirror each other's moves. Nations at war copy each other's total methods, until
This is not...
no individual is left untouched, and no resource is left unexploited.
This is so much worse than that. This is way, way, way worse. Copy might not be good enough. So essentially, in conflict, you have to do whatever it takes to win. And also, you probably cannot lag behind. If you just say that, like, oh, this is a good thing to do, like, this is how far I'm willing to go, you already lost. But also, if you're just trying to play catch up, you already lost. Also, if they're stronger than you, you already lost too. So, my point is, do not even play the game if you're not willing to win it.
The consequences of this relentless imitation were laid bare in the 20th century, a period that claimed millions of lives and squandered the labor of countless others, even perverting the advances of science toward destruction. This return to a primitive society on the warpath was no accident. It was a logical result of a centuries-long process of increasing state power.
Yeah, but you need a lot of indoctrination to get these boys standing in line.
As long as we continue to hand over more of ourselves to the state, no matter what benevolent face it wears, we may be paving the way for ever more devastating wars, each more destructive than the last, until we finally wage a war that sees the destruction of everything we hold dear. During the time of the monarchy, people protested every increase in taxation, and the king rarely dared to conscript his subjects. But today we accept these demands with little resistance. whereas a king risked his position and sometimes even his life if he took too much from his subjects.
Yeah, but in that case, it was obvious that it was the king's will, right? And the state kind of at least wears the mask of the will of the people.
In those earlier times, authority was embodied in the figure of the king, who made direct demands on his people, and with that authority came responsibility. But in a democratic system, these demands seem to come from a distant, faceless power. Where once people could point to a king or prince as the source of their troubles, now they speak of a vague and ominous they. It is they who raise our taxes, they who mobilize us.
Yeah, even at worst, they complain about the president, right? Oh, the president is an idiot. Or like, we hate the president. Like, the prime minister is not doing a good job. And that is why those who play this puppet show stay out of the limelight. Yeah, they just pull the strings, but otherwise they are shadows. They're the shades. They just play the masquerade, and you don't really hear from them. When it comes to rich boys these days, you probably would thinking of some tech bro, I guess, and not many other people, because those who have the money tend to stay hidden, because that way you cannot hurt them. I mean, that is the worst kind of fight, when you don't know who's hitting you, because you can, if the king is a dick, then you know that like the king might need some head choppy. But if you're just getting screwed, then like, okay, by who, right?
This shift is a product of the smokescreen the modern state.
You can't even fight them, because essentially, well, I guess they can be like a combined interest, but also they are behind the shadows.
Has drawn around itself. The common people no longer see the mechanisms at work, no longer protest, no longer react. In this way, the modern democratic state has brought to fruition the work that the monarchy began. This reality fundamentally contradicts the popular narrative of our time, that we are more free than ever before, and that democracy has brought an era of peace and justice. It stands as one of the great contradictions of history. The reason for...
If you need to say it, it's probably not true. If you need to believe it, it's probably not true. Yeah. I think the wisest philosopher is our eyeballs. And I'm not claiming that personal experience is gonna be the end of be all. But you need to look around, and if they are just saying a bunch of ideas of like, oh yeah, man, we have it the best, like, yeah, and you hear this in school, like, okay, maybe it's good to get a second opinion. You just don't take beliefs and idealism at face value.
The reason for this lies in the persistence of false and misguided beliefs, one of the most pervasive being the idea that the people are the sovereign. But in truth, power is never wielded by the majority. It always resides in the hands of a minority. As James Burnham succinctly put it,
It can be. The majority can rule, but I don't know of any cases where it really happened to the bigger country. And you can argue that more democratic countries have it better. I think that is a fair take.
that political power is always exercised by a minority, and the majority is always ruled. According to de Juvenel, the power of the modern state is not rooted in fear, but in a sense of partnership. Representative government carries the implication that those in power act as servants of the general will, wielding the authority of the collective. This means that when we obey the state's demands, we believe we are, in essence, obeying ourselves. De Juvenel argues that this piece of unconscious self-deception makes everyone complicit in the expansion of state power. If the people is always right, and the state is the people, then there can be no danger in surrendering into the hands of its mandatories complete, uncontrolled, and irrecoverable power. The concept of popular sovereignty creates a dangerous illusion. By claiming that the state's will comes from a collective being, the nation, of which rulers are mere instruments, we have constructed a fiction that makes the expansion of power not just acceptable, but desirable. This idea has taken root in the minds of many, as leaders eagerly reinforce it. As de Juvenel notes, they well understand its usefulness to them in making their power or their tyranny acceptable. The fiction of representative government...
Again, imagine if nothing has changed in your life, only you cannot vote.
dismisses the possibility of a true defender of the people, because this so-called representative...
You might be... Even though you all the bad things are happening, and you might not think that because of like... yeah, they would still keep happening. Just like you were voting before, possibly. Although, this experience, you probably had it even before. Like, you were like a kid, or maybe you went to a country and you don't get to vote there. You might think that is fine. Sure. One thing is, you don't get to vote for like 20 years. It's not up to you. Apparently, you're just too dumb. But like the other voters.
Is viewed as embodying the people themselves. Against this construct of the popular will, the individual is left defenseless, unable to oppose the general interest as a counterweight. If a ruler's authority is derived from the general will, he can issue any command he wishes, and the subject is compelled to obey absolutely, for each individual is considered the author of the ruler's actions, as their collective representative. What this means fundamentally is that the expansion of power is not solely the result of deceit by those in power, because we are all complicit in its growth. Authoritarianism always relies on widespread complicity. The logical conclusion of the social pact is that there exists a right of command to which the private individual has no recourse. The so-called power of the people is, in reality, only tenuously linked to the people, like an umbilical cord connecting them to the general election.
If you want power of the people, then the closest is direct democracy. People might critique it like, oh my god, the people are gonna be stupid. Yeah, but they get their will. I mean, the main concern is that there's gonna be a tyranny of majority instead of tyranny of minority.
In truth, it is a power over the people, a power made all the stronger because it derives its authority from this fragile connection. In reality, they are citizens for a day and subjects for 4 years. Power of the people. This confusion of thought is at the root of modern despotism. In a system of popular sovereignty, we are told that in obeying the state, we are merely obeying ourselves. This idea dissolves the traditional barriers between rulers and the ruled, making resistance to state power not only difficult, but conceptually incoherent. It blurs the line between individual liberty and political freedom. In declaring the sovereignty of the people, individuals gain the power to choose their rulers, but little else.
Yeah, but do they even get that choice? Like, imagine if some rich guy came up to you and allowed you the choice every 4 years to pick between two puppets, one dressed in blue, other dressed in red, and once you pick that, they're just gonna keep doing whatever they want. But you do get this choice. You get to choose which color the puppet will wear.
This notion of popular sovereignty creates a circular logic in which the individual has no rights left to assert against the collective will, now embodied by the state. One of the paradoxes of democratic systems is that despite their rhetoric of liberation and representation, they often suppress individualistic tendencies within society. While democracy claims to free individuals from the constraints of old power structures, it simultaneously centralizes power and limits divergent interests.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense for a state that claims to stand for the will of the people. But that is what happens effectively. The state, the country, educates people to think the right way.
As the representative of the so-called general interest, the state seeks to suppress any interest that diverges from this unified vision. It aims to compress society into a single homogeneous whole over which it can exert control.
And ideally, people get to the point where they are even unable to think of undesirable ideas to the state and possibly to others, especially to those in power.
As a representative of the general will, all divergent interests impose direct limits on its power. Through its rhetoric, the state pursues this suppression while claiming to serve the greater good. Appeals to the greater good in general.
Okay, but think about good. What is good in this world? Because, like, sure, there is will and there is power, right? But what is good? People tend to call good as their will. It's synonymous. People might have some abstract definition of good, but in almost every case, will is good. That's what it means. If you say that the movie is good, then you say that I like it. That's kind of what it means. And evil or bad would mean that antagonistic to your will. That's it. So the point I'm arguing here is that if you suppose you had like a beneficial tyrant or just a loving tyrant who's like just trying to do everything right for the people, but they will not be able to because their idea of good, they would still be oppressing the people with their idea of good, their will. Even though they would completely believe that their intentions are good, it doesn't matter. They might think that religion is the best thing ever, so everyone must have it, right? So they are the promoter of the good, of the greater good. Doesn't matter. But essentially what they're doing is just pushing their will, while completely thinking that they stand for some goodness, abstract goodness.
In general will, allow democratic power to stifle those who seek autonomy, all while maintaining the appearance of acting in the public's interest. Democratic powers, like all forms of power, resist attempts by regions or groups to assert autonomy or independence. What makes democratic power unique, however, is its ability to justify this centralization through appeals to the general will or the greater good. These concepts are used as justifications to override the desires of minority groups or regions seeking greater autonomy. This exposes the lie at the heart of democracy. In practice, democracy becomes a power over the people, rather than a true power of the people. As Hans Hermann Hoppe notes, the state operates in a legal vacuum. There exists no contract between the state and its citizens. With the rise of political parties, sovereignty has effectively shifted from the people to the political machine. Elections have become merely a way for the people to place themselves under the control of a small gang. As the political machine grows stronger, party lines are drawn, and genuine debate becomes irrelevant. Since rational thought is not widely practiced by the masses, appeals are made to emotions instead.
To be fair, I think that's all humans.
Not everyone is trained in the discipline of rationality, no one is immune to emotional responses. Each party stirs up hope, trust, and affection for itself, while inciting indignation and hatred against its opposition.
Yeah, it's so annoying and so normalized that basically both parties, they don't even say policies, right? They just say dumb bullshit. And it's just so normalized that it's dumb. You're completely wasting your time listening to politicians. Partly because they just do whatever after, but partly because they completely disrespect the audience. Like, what would be like some guy, you know what I would like to see if it has to be the system? Then eliminate the puppet. Just put their policies out there. They're just like one paper, done. Right? This is what I'm gonna do. If you're not, just chop my head off. That's it. I would like that.
By opening the prospect of power to anyone ambitious enough to seek it, democracy has made the expansion of state power much easier. When anyone could potentially become a minister, no one is inclined to destroy a position they may one day hold, nor to limit the power of a state machine they hope to command in the future. This creates widespread complicity in the extension of power within a democratic system. The political party is born from this competition for power. In the resulting chaos, people increasingly crave leadership by a strong, decisive will.
Yeah, but this could be just a pony show. What I hinted at before. That what if this is all bullshit? You just have some rich guy, you have two puppets you can vote for, all owned by the rich guy, all owned by the same class, and this is just all a show. Sure, you might say that, okay, if I vote on the left or vote on the right, they have some significance, sure. But will it have significance over time? Especially because your choices are limited to one or two options, generally speaking, worldwide, when it comes to your governments. I guess I don't know of all.
Eventually, the time comes when a single man or a small group seizes control of the political machine and bends it to their own purposes. It is only after a would-be tyrant takes over that the crushing power of the state becomes fully apparent. These individuals, however, did not create this vast apparatus of oppression. They are merely, as de Juvenel notes, its bad tenants. Democracy, then, in the centralizing, pattern-making, absolutist shape which we have given to it, is the time of tyranny's incubation. The system built in the name of the people becomes the perfect tool for tyranny when it falls into the wrong hands. According to de Juvenel, most political doctrines focus only on the outward appearance of power, failing to grasp its inner nature.
And by the way, these fascist regimes tend to be more and more popular the more people are starting to make a ruckus, because you need like a strong hand to keep people down, right? You can't even keep up the pretense of democracy.
Power is not a substance that can be fused with a nation. It has a life of its own, nor does it reside in any rightful purpose or reason. At its core, power is command, and as such, it can only exist for its own sake. While the characteristics of power may change over time, its fundamental nature remains constant. It is driven by egoism. Some argue that republicanism solves the problem of democracy by instituting laws that protect the individual from the majority. This is only partly true.
Huh? Why not the other way around?
A government of laws is still a government of people, and laws, no matter how well crafted, cannot fully contain the nature of power. Power always usurps authority.
Is that just a code to like protecting the rich guy from the mob? Now, I understand the theory behind this. Like, you might not want a tyranny of the majority, like tyrannizing the minority for no reason, right? But what we do have instead, all the time, and this is the way the world operates, is that we have a tyranny of the minority, and apparently that's okay. No one seems to mind it. Well, people do mind it, but like, it doesn't matter if they have no power to change it. But those who have it good, they don't mind it. In fact, they might claim that it is because I'm superior, I get to rule.
Power, in its essence, is not a static force, but a dynamic entity with an inherent tendency to expand. This expansionist nature is rooted in the egoistic impulses of those who wield it. Power, in this view, is not satisfied with maintaining the status quo. It constantly seeks to grow. Because of this, power will subvert any doctrine, even one designed to limit or restrain it. Republicanism may offer protections, but it cannot change the fundamental truth. Power, by its nature, will push against all constraints. Modern ideological notions of freedom and democracy have not restrained state power. They have, in fact, only strengthened it. Power is authority and makes for more authority. It is force and makes for more force. Or, if a less metaphysical terminology is preferred, ambitious wills drawn by the lure of power expend unceasingly their energies in its behalf, that they may bind society in an ever tighter grip and extract from it more of its resources.
But the best defense against this is more wills. That's it.
Juvenel's analysis of power draws some interesting parallels with Friedrich Nietzsche's concept of the will to power. In fact, I'll explain it in terms of Nietzsche's idea. Nietzsche argued that the fundamental drive in human nature is not merely self-preservation, but a relentless striving for growth, expansion, and self-overcoming. This will to power, as Nietzsche conceived it, goes beyond a mere desire for political or social dominance. It is a deeper psychological impulse that fuels all human action and creativity. As Nietzsche put it, life is an instinct for growth, for survival, for the accumulation of forces, for power.
I kind of disagree with Nietzsche. Well, he is close, I think, but I disagree with him, because suppose you were God, who had ultimate power, then your life is utterly pointless. There's no more power to get. What you would have instead is that people have wills, and they need power to manifest it. And if you don't have a will, I guess, at least at one time, then getting more power is still a safe bet. But I'm not sure this is like a quest for power necessarily, because if people have a choice between doing what they will and spending time getting more power, people would choose their will, I think. Else you would be the guy who's just going to the gym all the time to be more swole, or however the boys say it, instead of doing what you want in life.
The egoistic nature of state power can be seen as a collective manifestation of the individual will to power. Those in positions of authority are driven by a deep psychological impulse to expand their influence and push beyond their limitations. The growth of power is not just the product of rational decision-making or a response to external threats. It is an expression of a primal human drive. Individuals and institutions that wield power become vessels for this psychological force, acting as channels for its relentless pursuit of dominance and growth. Juvenal argues that in every station of life, a man feels more complete when he is imposing his will, using others as instruments to fulfill his grand designs.
I'm not sure I completely agree with this. Suppose you want to manifest your power as much as possible, or your will as much as possible, you probably would trample on the will of others. But just to trample on the will of others just for no reason, just for self-satisfaction, that they hold your will, they become an extension of it. It depends on the person, because their will might be getting off on the idea that everyone thinks the same as them, or everyone believes the same things as them. You see people like that.
To rule a people, what an extension of the ego is there.
Essentially, they are an extension of your will.
Juvenal compares this sensation to the pleasure of atrophied limbs returning to life, but even that pales in comparison to the unmatched delight of directing an immense human mass with a mere gesture. The power to prompt the...
Albeit they are often disingenuous, because they are not teaching others their will. Because what you might have is that the priest teaches the mob of, like, praising God, but they're not really occupying the same position, because they're trying to benefiting from the mob. So it's fundamentally hypocritical oftentimes. They're not picking the same position. They're essentially just using the mob to manifest their will, but they not necessarily will the same thing as they teach the mob.
Prompt the distant movements of a multitude of unknown people, with nothing more than the trace of a pencil or a spoken command, gives a man a profound sense of influence.
Essentially, like, let's say that you were like a warmonger rich boy. You're like, yeah, that country needs to go down. But you are firing up the young people to die in your name. Or, no, die for glory or something. Honor and glory. But you're not going. You're staying home and getting paid.
In his mind's eye, he sees the canal being dug along the line he has drawn, the boats that will soon glide along its waters, the villages springing up on its banks, and the bustling metropolis filled with goods and human activity. All monuments to his agency, each a testament to his far-reaching influence. The orders he gives move as quickly as the thoughts he thinks, setting in motion the gears of a vast machinery. With every command, rivers are redirected, lives are altered, and entire landscapes are bent to the will of one man, or a few. This extension of the ego leads to what Nietzsche calls intoxication, a state of heightened power and agency, where a person experiences an exhilarating sense of being a prime mover in the world. In this state...
This is interesting. I guess we might not necessarily even make a distinction between just, like, dominating, like, the land and dominating the will of others.
One becomes acutely aware of their ability to shape events, influence others, and bring their vision into reality. It's a heightened consciousness in which the individual's will seems to transcend their physical boundaries, impacting lives and events far beyond their immediate reach. There's a universal need to exercise some kind of power, or to create for oneself the appearance of some power, if only temporarily, in the form of intoxication. This intoxication...
Also, most people's claim to power is very much driven by just perception. They don't have real power, right? It's entirely opinion. Even if you were God, Now, this is an excellent example. Suppose you had a choice between being a king, but you are king as long as others believe that you're a king. If people stop believing that you're a king, you are no one. In fact, you could be the most useless person, or at least one of the most useless person in the kingdom. You suck. You have no real power, not with your hands, but all of your power comes from others believing that you're king. That's it. In fact, even that comes from just luck, being born to the right person. But suppose you were God, you have real power. Yeah, no, even if no one believes that you're God, doesn't matter. Still God. So the person who would be in the first group would be way more insecure about their power. So this could be the manager who's like, oh yeah, I'm the manager, I feel important. But like some programmer guy's like, fuck yeah, I'm awesome, baby. Like, you don't think I'm awesome? Use your eyes, baby.
Is marked by a seamless fusion of thought and action, where ideas swiftly translate into tangible consequences. The person feels a godlike sense of creative force, exerting control not just over their environment, but over the destinies of others. It's a sensation where one's influence appears limitless, where command and outcome blur into a single fluid motion of power. I do not mean to suggest that those in authority are inherently different, nor that power itself is a corrupting force. Rather, it is that each individual's will to power constantly collides with others, hindering its expansion.
It is a bit of a corrupting force, because they more and more try to exercise their will. Well, maybe it's not a corrupting force in their eyes, but it's gonna be a corrupting force in the eyes of others. Because suppose you took a person and you made them God, they would exercise their will more. And others might not like that.
Its expansion. Within a larger entity, these myriad wills converge under a unified set of strategic objectives. My idea is that every specific body strives to become master over all space, and to extend its force, its will to power, and to thrust back all that resists its extension. But it continually encounters similar efforts on the part of other bodies, and ends by coming to an arrangement, union, with those of them that are sufficiently related to it. Thus they then conspire together for power, and the process goes on.
So essentially you just want to do what you want, and be powerful enough to do it, and you kind of butt heads with other people. Conspire together. I don't think that is the case though, because suppose what people want to do is they want to convert others. This is why it can be terrible when others say like, oh man, you know, decide this for me. Like people rarely want to compromise and yield. What they want is you to agree with them and bend to their will.
Those who make up this collective body come to identify their own ego with it, feeling a sense of causal potency as it grows and extends. In Nietzschean terms, this signals to the organism that its will is functioning in a healthy, vigorous way. The will to power is defined by its natural drive to assimilate and evolve, constantly seeking out and incorporating other forces to strengthen itself, expanding through this process of integration. Moreover, individual forces are often drawn toward a superior will because by aligning with it, they experience an increase in their own power and capacity to achieve their aims.
But that would be kind of a perception, right? Again, like the king might feel powerful, but it's all a feeling, and it's all based on it's all based on, like, you know, make-believe, right?
This convergence of wills under a larger banner is not simply an act of submission, it's a recognition of the enhanced agency and reach that come with aligning oneself with a greater force. In this way, the individual finds a more expansive role within a collective, much like how the ruler's ego in de Juvenel's analysis extends across the entire body politic, making every action of the state feel like an extension of personal will. In this way, the interplay of wills to power is not merely a process of domination and subjugation, but a complex dance of collision, convergence, and mutual empowerment, all in the pursuit of an ever-expanding sphere of influence.
Is it really mutual empowerment? I don't really agree with this. Because what would normally happen is that others will try to get you to adopt their will.
The ego, subsumed into the greater whole, experiences the triumphs of the collective as its own, even as it contributes its part to further the overarching agenda. As de Juvenel observes, the impulse is nourished by all the egoisms, great or small, noble or sordid, which taken together make up the egoism of the state. In a monarchical system, as the ruler's influence expands, the governed populace becomes an extension of his ego, their joys and pains merging with his own. The subjects are no longer mere pieces to be moved around. Instead, each one becomes a living cell in the body politic, their sensations intimately linked to the ruler's directing mind. In this way, the egoism of power stretches its tendrils throughout the social mass, until ruler and ruled become indistinguishable. A secure and lasting hold on power cements this identification, allowing the ruler's egoism to be fully absorbed into the general welfare.
Yeah, but it is worth pointing out that, let's say that like a master and slave relationship, like the master might have some will, but they are not gonna teach the slave the same thing. They're gonna teach the slave different ideas, different behaviors. They kind of want the state to be extension of their will.
In contrast, the more tenuous or fleeting grip on power within a democratic system encourages the exploitation of the nation as an instrument of personal ambition. Here, the governing ego resists dissolution into the collective, seeing the state not as an extension of itself, but as a tool for achieving its own goals. The state, with its monopoly on force and seemingly boundless reach, has often been seen as the embodiment of evil, a leviathan to be resisted and dismantled.
Yeah, you gotta keep in mind that evil is just how people see what is antagonistic to their will. That's it. And they see good as supporting their will. And that's it.
This perception has inspired countless revolutionaries, determined to liberate humanity from the yoke of oppression. Yet history is not without its ironies.
And I would make the claim that it's subjective.
The great revolutions of recent times, though driven by the desire to curtail the state's dominion, have paradoxically served to strengthen it. As Lenin observed, through all the innumerable revolutions which have taken place in Europe since the end of the feudal system, this bureaucratic and military machine has developed, improved, and strengthened. Every revolution of the past has done no more than improve the government machine, when its real task was to smite and smash it.
Yeah, that is very common. Once people like smash their way to power, they're like, okay, boys, I guess you're on the new government. Well, we are the good guys.
This is not to suggest that we should bow before the altar of the state or passively accept its unchecked growth. The state's capacity for destruction is reason enough to advocate for limiting its power. However, to portray the state as an inherently malevolent entity is to engage in a mythologization that obscures the true nature of the problem. If our aim is to safeguard liberty and curb the state's encroachment on our lives, we must first free ourselves from the illusion that this can be achieved through mere laws or tinkering with governmental structures. The will to power operates at a level far deeper than the superficial trappings of politics. What the concept of the will to power reveals is that the only effective check on the state's power is the existence of independent bodies with a will to power strong enough to resist the state's advances. Our task, then, is not to tilt at the windmills of state power, but to cultivate and strengthen the institutions and associations that exist independently of the state, to nurture within them a resolute will to power that can stand as a bulwark against the state's totalizing tendencies.
You just need to not dominate the people in the first place. You need more wills, right? Not this pretend voting crap. And one thing you would need from the get-go is eliminate money in politics, and you would need a way more equality. Because essentially money is vote. But any state that just kind of molds its people in schools and media to be a certain way, like, this is actually very interesting. This is a very interesting topic, because suppose you are one of the rulers and you own the media and you have high influence on the schools. You essentially not only have your will, but you have a lot of impact on what people think. So maybe like 60% of the population thinks the same as you, even though for 59% of them, or actually 99% of them, let's go with that, it makes no sense. It just sucks. But you managed to convince 59% of the people to stand for you, because you have power to influence them.
Only by accepting the reality of power, rather than attempting to wish it away, can we hope to preserve the precious sphere of individual freedom. As Bertrand de Jouvenel writes, liberty is not our more or less illusory participation in the absolute sovereignty of the social whole over the parts. It is rather the direct, immediate, and concrete sovereignty of man over himself, the thing which allows and compels him to unfold his personality, gives him mastery over and responsibility for his destiny.